There is a fascinating Talmudic discussion that I think has an association with this week's parsha. The Talmud discusses, and in actual fact it's codified this way in Jewish law, the fact that on some spiritual level, cut finger and toenails have a negative aura. And as a consequence of that negative aura, they present a very real and a palpable threat to a pregnant woman. As difficult as this might sound to appear to understand, our rabbis tell us in the Talmud, and as I say, it's codified in the Jewish law, that a woman who steps over cut nails in the place where they were cut runs a risk, God forbid, of a miscarriage. And therefore the Talmud gives us advice as to how to dispose of the nails once they have been cut. There's various different suggestions: to cast them away, to remove them from the place where they were cut. And then the Talmud says that a chassid, which is a person who wants to go above and beyond the call of duty, doesn't simply suffice with removing them from the place where they were cut, but chassid, that a chassid, someone who wants to go above and beyond the call of duty, actually burns the fingernails. The question is why? Why does that constitute the highest level of piety? The fact that a person, rather than simply discarding the fingernails, actually goes and burns them. And the answer is that when a person burns part of his body, even the nails once they have been cut, and obviously there's no pain associated, there's no risk and danger on a physical sense, on a metaphysical sense, on a spiritual level, for some reason or another that I cannot explain, we are told that when a person burns their own nails, it presents the risk and the danger to the person themselves. And the level of being a chassid of the Gemara is that despite the fact that it presents a personal risk and a danger to the individual himself, he would rather absorb that risk and that threat himself than potentially risk the pregnancy of a strange woman. And therefore this is the epitome of what we call in the Talmud a chassid. Someone who puts himself at naught, is willing in fact to jeopardize his own self for the sake of somebody else's well-being. This principle plays out in 2 weeks ago the parsha, this week's parsha, and again later on in the Chumash. And it shows us leadership, and more importantly, it shows us what is critical as far as Jewish acting is concerned, behaving Jewish. We all know the famous story of Noach, which we read 2 weeks ago. Noach is advised that a flood is going to take place. He's instructed to build an ark which will serve as salvation for himself, his wife, their 3 children and their respective spouses. Our rabbis tell us that for 120 years he involved himself in the building of the ark, so that possibly a person would come around and say, "Hey Noach, what are you doing?" And that would prompt Noach to respond and say, "Well, God is planning a flood that will annihilate everything, every living creature. And this is my salvation." And hopefully upon hearing that, the person would be aroused to do tshuva, to change his ways, and would be able to spare the whole universe the flood. There was nothing proactive. He doesn't go around door to door saying, "Listen friends, I have spoken to God. God has advised me that a flood is going to wipe out everything unless we become more moral and ethical human beings." He doesn't do that. He suffices with the knowledge that he's available to answer questions. If anybody is perturbed or intrigued by what he's doing, by all means. But there's nothing proactive to go and help others. Contrast that with this week's parasha. God reflects that as he is about to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah and the environs, he recognizes that it would be highly unfair and inappropriate if he doesn't advise Avraham Avinu first of the impending destruction that's going to take place. Avraham Avinu hears the decision of God. He has to surely appreciate that God doesn't just arbitrarily without due process and justice, determined to wipe out an entire population. And nevertheless, despite having heard it from God himself, he starts to plead with God. And he says, God, you're the righteous of all righteousness. Is it appropriate that you should punish the righteous together with the wicked? And in wiping out Sodom and Amorah and all the environs, also the righteous will be impacted and affected. And God says, you know what, that's fine. I'll accede to your request. And Avraham says, you know what, if amongst the 5 cities in this entire region, there are 10 righteous individuals per city, 50 righteous people, why are you going to wipe everything out? And God says, you know what, Avraham, a very good point. And I commit not to destroy these cities and their population if we should find 50 righteous. In other words, you won't find. Avraham Avinu continues to bargain down until 10. When he realizes that there aren't even 10 righteous individuals in this entire region, he recognizes why God had determined they needed to be wiped out, and he remained silent at that point. But more than remaining silent, Avraham Shavlim Komo, he tried. He gave it his best. He failed, so he goes home. Avraham Avinu, in contrast to Noach, is willing to put up a fight on behalf of humanity, on behalf of the people of Sodom. But that's it. He doesn't jeopardize himself. And then we jump a few books, in actual fact, to Moshe. Next book. The Jewish people sin with the golden calf. God is exceedingly disappointed. It's so short after receiving the Torah, after the exodus from Egypt, and immediately we're able to succumb to the lowest of the low, to the sin that negates God's existence. He is ready to wipe out the entire Jewish people. Moshe Rabbeinu, he also acts as an advocate on behalf of the Jews. What will the Egyptians say? You took them out of Egypt to kill them in the desert? Is that the kind of reputation that you, God, want to have? And he doesn't stop with that. And he says, God, I'll tell you one more thing. If my arguments are not going to win the day, you're not going to forgive the Jewish people, then I do not want a bar of your Jewish concept. This Torah business, not for me. Wipe me out of this book. Don't give me promises that the new nation of Israel will come forth from me, Moshe. That's not consolation. I'm here to advocate for the Jewish people. You save them, or you take me together with them. And God says the famous words which we say on Yom Kippur, Salachti kidvarech, I have forgiven as you have said. Moshe Rabbeinu is burning his nails. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying, not only will I make sure that somebody else is not adversely impacted, I'm willing to do so even at my own personal expense. Even if I will be wiped out together with them, as righteous as I may be. I'm willing to burn my nails even though it's going to affect me, but if it's going to help somebody else, I'm willing to do that. Yiddishkeit, Jewish leadership demands exactly that. Being a Jew demands putting ourselves second and the welfare of others first. And I would venture to say that in this, it's not just a Jewish concept. It's the underpinnings of successful, happy, positive relationships. When a person is able to say, whatever you want, that I'm willing to set aside my needs in order to secure yours. Imagine every marriage where the person is willing to do what the spouse wants, regardless of their own personal sensibilities. And I'm not obviously talking about going against one's beliefs and one's values. But imagine if we were Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the message of this week's parasha. Avraham Avinu was great. He was the founding forefather of our people. But it requires a little bit extra, the willingness to put oneself on the line for the welfare of others. Good Shabbos.